Grown-up conversations with people who really know their stuff. That's what happens here on The Money. And that's why we've got Bill Grimsey with us. He's the former CEO of Iceland, Wix, and the British food wholesale operator Booker, someone who knows all about running huge retail operations and overseeing mass pay awards. And here in the studio, another expert, Vicky Price. She used to run the government's economic service, a very senior civil servant. Again, huge experience when it comes to analysing pay awards. Vicky, you're a friend of the show. Great to have you with us. Bill, let's start with you. What do you think of the news this morning? It looks like a really chunky pay rise by Tesco. It certainly looks competitive compared to their rivals. They are following suit. It doesn't come in until July. And as you'll have instantly grasped, it's a lot less than the expected rate of inflation.
Well, I think Tesco have reached an agreement with Usdaw, and this agreement they've reached, I think, is a good one for Tesco. As for the people that work at Tesco, you are right. It's going to mean that they are slightly worse off in the long term. As I understand it, I think this is an agreement for 1 year, which means that when inflation starts to increase at the back end of this year, next year's award is going to be even tougher. So what we're seeing is that supermarkets of the scale of Tesco have two major costs. One is property and the other is people. And the people cost is the biggest part of their equation, and it's a real tough one. And so what this will mean is that it will be inflationary in its own right, so it will feed through into prices unless competition can keep it down. We are facing the toughest time ever since the 70s, in my view, with pressures on prices, inflation going in danger of getting out of control, and that means that families will be worse off. And so we might see some industrial action as we go forward.
Interesting stuff, Vicky. You and I have been predicting this for months here on The Money. Below inflation pay rises. But again, the supermarkets will say they're competing on wages. They're vying for staff. They're trying to fill vacancies. Yet all of them, every single large retailer supermarket in this country has awarded their staff below inflation pay rises. They can't be competing that much.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that the consumer can ill afford to buy the products that they've got. So at any higher prices than what is being given now. Because obviously there's been this big increase in food costs and supermarkets have had to cope with that, and they have been raising prices up to a point. But what you're finding is that the profit margins are really very tight. So
2.6 billion quid they're on for this year.
That's because they're large. But if you actually look at the margins, they're quite small. So the question is, will they reach a point where the costs of labour are so high that in fact, they start losing money. And that's going to be a big issue for them. It's one of the reasons why I think they've been quite careful about what wage increases they're offering. And they're probably waiting to see what will happen to prices more generally and the extent to which they can pass on some of those food price increases, transport price increases, etc., to others. But the point of industrial action is a really interesting one, because we have seen the number of disputes increasing very significantly. So if you just look at the last few months, and if you just look at what happened during 2021 itself, you've seen a very substantial increase in the number of strikes taking place, industrial disputes in all sorts of areas.
Not just the public sector either, is it?
Absolutely. And you're going to see a lot more of that, I suspect, as people are realising that, in fact, the cost of living is such that their real wages are declining, which is exactly what you're saying.
You know, Bill, you and I are old enough to remember the 70s. I wouldn't dream of remarking on Vicky's experiences, whether or not she was around then. But look, I talk to a lot of politicians. I'm sure you do too. So often I've heard, there's much less trade union membership now and there's less militancy around now. It won't get like the 70s again. We haven't got those big industries, the big manufacturers, the coal miners and all the rest of it. I'm thinking that's wrong. I'm thinking politics could get pretty nasty over the next 12 months. What do you think?
Well, I think it should. get pretty nasty, because I think what's happening is that the everyday working family in this country is going to undergo the biggest squeeze they've ever experienced, probably more so than families experienced in the 70s, at a time when we had double-digit inflation quite commonly. I think that it's quite clear that we've come through a pandemic. They've got the impact of what's happening in Ukraine, and we've got the impact of Brexit. Those three things have been huge on our economy, and now we're seeing that we've lost control of inflation. I mean, once you lose control of inflation, it's very difficult to get it back. It will take some substantial action, and I don't think the Bank of England's reactions have been high enough and quick enough to raise interest rates. So, it's a very delicate balance that the economy is facing. And I think you'll find that everyday people who are facing massive increases, like a litre of milk was £1 a few months ago, it's probably 1.25 now. I mean, that's not 2 or 3%, that's a 20% increase in prices. And I guarantee that the supermarkets aren't making any money out of milk. So something is wrong somewhere, and people facing these huge bills from energy and petrol and electricity and gas, coupled with prices in the supermarkets going up, and the fact that we're going to see a lot more people fall into poverty, I think we've got the ingredients for a destabilised situation, and the politics behind it are huge, and the Labour Party should be exploiting this harder than they are, in my view, and we've got to take some pretty serious action to make sure that the everyday working person in this country can have a relatively comfortable life. And at the moment, they're under huge pressure. And let's not forget the public sector as well, in the fact that the nurses who've taken us through this pandemic are seriously worse off because of inflation. Let's not forget the police that have seen us through this, whose wage rises are going to be even lower and seriously below inflation. So, yes, we have a very, very difficult task ahead of us, and it's up to the government to look at this more seriously and to see if we can't do something to alleviate the pressures that families are going to come under.
Well, Bill, we contacted Tesco in regards to their pay rise, and Jason Tarry, Tesco UK CEO, said, "We're delighted to have reached an agreement with Usdaw," that's a prominent union in the retailing sector, "that recognises the vital role our colleagues play in our business now and in the future, giving them a well-deserved pay rise, more access to extra hours and sending out long-term commitment and investment in their careers at Tesco." But, Vicky, it's still a real terms pay cut, and that's from Tesco, a highly reputable employer. They know it's going to be poured over by people like me. It's going to be a high-profile thing. A lot of people won't get any kind of pay rise at all. They just have to absorb the whole of that 7-8% increase in inflation.
Well, it's absolutely true. And if you look at those who are working, what you find in the latest data suggests that if you exclude bonus payments, the increase seems to be just 3.8%.
Yeah.
That's
an average.
It's the average,
yeah.
Yes. That, of course, includes public sector, just as we've been hearing, but it includes the private sector. Yes, there are some outliers. So if you look at business services, or you look at sort of more professional firms...
Or haulage truckers or something, where there's a specific shortage.
But also places where there isn't such a shortage, such as the financial sector, for example, where the pay rises are considerably above the rate of inflation. So what you find is that there is a difference across. But what is worrying probably for the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, who runs the Bank of England, is that, in fact, pay increases are beginning to creep up.
Yeah.
And if they begin to creep up and they get completely ingrained into the system, then inflation could well start moving even higher. So we need to look at that from that point of view as well.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.